It is the world's longest undefended border, a thin line defining them, the U.S., and us, Canada. It is a border that sees billions of dollars of goods pass over it every day as we do business with our largest trading partner. But for all the border gives in terms of trade, it also takes in terms of price differences. And joining us now to tell us what the key challenges are these days, in Albany, New York, via Skype, Ambarish Chandra, Assistant Professor of Business Economics at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. In our nation's capital via Skype, Jim Stanford, economist with the Canadian Auto Workers. In Windsor, Ontario, William Anderson, Chair of Cross-Border Policy Studies at the University of Windsor. And here in Toronto, Dion Brisbois, CEO of the Retail Council of Canada. And it's great to have all four of you on the program. Three first-timers, I believe, as well. Jim, you've been on before, but nobody else has, so I'm glad to welcome you all. And let's just, William, if I can start with you, follow up with the discussion we just had. Since you represent a border community there, I want to get your take on how significant that border is in a post-9/11 world to Windsor, Ontario.
Well, the border is, very significant to us here in Windsor. Everybody in Windsor is interested in the border. Not just because of the cross-border shopping issue, which is a big issue, but because bread and butter industry here is the automotive industry, and everything that has to do with the automotive industry involves moving either finished cars or components across the border. So everybody in Windsor is very interested in the border. And our relationship as far as cross-border shopping, it is a problem, it's a challenge for our retailers. I think they make a pretty good effort to do things like have their own Black Friday events to compete with that. But also being across the border is an advantage. It's one of the things that makes it attractive to live in Windsor because you've got big-time sports, you've got an airport that you can go all over the world from. So having that access to things across the border has its positive side as well.
Is the border still too thick, if you know what I mean?
On a day-to-day basis, it generally isn't. I cross the border frequently. It's really unusual to be held up for more than about 15 minutes. It is thick, I think, in terms of moving freight because there are costs associated with customs administration. There's problems of trucks having empty backhauls. I recently did a study with Statistics Canada on that. We found that moving something across the border costs sort of an extra 20 to 40% because of all of those security costs and customs administration costs. So it's still thick from an economic perspective.
Okay, let's put some numbers up at this point because, as I mentioned in the last segment, this program today really emanates from a conversation I had with Donna Hilsinger from Sault Ste. Marie about what the cross-border challenges are like for someone in her business. And as a result of that, our producer Hillary Clark put something up on our website and kind of a questionnaire, and we asked people, weigh in, tell us your views on cross-border shopping. And here's what we got back. Almost 40% of people said they cross-border shop and it's no one's business if they do. Just under a quarter said they worry about spending their money outside the country, so they only do it when they're traveling for some other reason. About 20% said that the problem really comes down to businesses here not doing enough to compete. Only 5% saw a role for government in this story, and about 10% didn't think it captured their perspective at all. Let's pick up on this. It sounds like, Ambarish, ironically, you're down in Albany, New York, doing some studying right now on cross-border shopping issues. So let me pick up on that with you. It looked like the largest plurality there say, cross-border shopping is our business, not yours, and we'll do it if we want. Does that sound right to you?
It sounds exactly right to me. I think Canadian consumers, Ontarians, should absolutely, hunt down lower prices, bargains for themselves, for their families. It's currently the case that often prices are lower in the States, but that's true today. It's not always been true. There'll come a time in the future when it won't be true again. But as long as the Canadian dollar is strong, I think Canadians and Ontarians should absolutely try to take advantage of our greater buying power. And if that means buying products slightly cheaper in the States or flying out of U.S. airports at much lower prices, I think they should.
Jim Stanford, what's your view on that?
Well, Steve, I'm never optimistic that consumers will do something just out of compassion or solidarity or loyalty to their country. Most consumers do follow their pocketbook, but recognizing the individual motivation to go cross-border shopping in search of a deal does not obviate the fact that there's huge economic losses to Canada because of that amount of cross-border shopping. Losses to our businesses, losses to our governments as well. You know, the Royal Bank estimated about $20 billion would be spent by Canadians on cross-border trips this year. That's $2.5 billion lost sales tax alone to our federal and provincial governments at a time when we can't afford it. So while I'm all in favor of individual choice and having traffic flowing both ways, in terms of the rules and policies that we put in place as a country, I think we have to be sensible about it, and we should encourage people to shop at home rather than shop abroad. And I think there are some sensible ways to do that.
Deanne, would you go even further and say that Canadians have a patriotic duty to shop in Canada as opposed to the United States, so that that tax revenue stays here, pays for our social services, etc.?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I would, in fact, echo what Jim said. I think at the end of the day, most retailers will agree that consumers should be able to shop where and when they want to shop. I think one of the topics that's not been mentioned is the responsibility of local governments, the chambers of commerce. It's interesting, during this whole debate of cross-border shopping, we've heard governments say, well, consumers should shop anywhere they want, and retailers are gouging, when in fact, we've heard what they're buying, and most of what they're buying are products where the price is set by government. So for example, food, the two most common items purchased in cross-border shopping is dairy, and it's chicken and milk or butter, and those prices are set by marketing boards. So I find, and most retailers find this fascinating. I think I would agree with Jim. I think there needs to be some leadership here by industry and by government in showing consumers the impact of their choices. But to stop them from shopping wherever they want, I think, does not reflect the views of retailers.
William, is it your view that people in Windsor ought to spend as much of their money in Windsor as they can and not go to Detroit, maybe unless they want to see the Lions or the Red Wings play, but otherwise try to keep that money at home?
Well, you know, I don't think that, I think I agree with what everybody said, that it doesn't really make a lot of sense to try to preach to people and that they shouldn't go across the border. But I think, you know, you need to provide a better picture of what the situation is. If we have actually a very vibrant, a very nice retail sector here in Windsor. I mean, I've lived in big cities most of my life, and I've lived in Windsor for a few years, and I think there's a lot of good services here. If people don't support the local retail community, well, eventually we won't have that, and so it's going to take away from our quality of life. But at the same time, living in Windsor, part of living in Windsor is you know, going across the border and doing things and buying things over there. So I think that we need some sort of a rational policy to try to keep this reasonable. And I think one of the things you've got to bear in mind is that all retailers in Canada are at a competitive disadvantage because of the fact that the Canadian federal government collects a lot of tax revenue from consumption tax, from the GST, that you don't have in the United States. And so even if you didn't have these price differentials that, you know, might be the fault of the retailers or might be the fault of the wholesalers or whoever, you still would be at a 7% disadvantage in terms of the taxes that people pay when they go across the border.
I mentioned a few moments ago that Hillary Clark, our producer, put something up on our website, and boy, she got quite a torrent of responses. Here's one of them that I want to read right now, and then let's chat about this. I live in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the poster says. Since 9/11, I have disliked shopping across the border due to bad experiences with heightened border security. I do not regularly go over there for gas and groceries like some Ontario Sioux people do. Frankly, I think Sioux, Ontario has much better meat and produce, and some items such as olive oil and spices are cheaper in Canada. However, my husband and I often order more expensive items online to be picked up in Sioux, Michigan, because we are outraged that companies think they can get away with charging absurdly higher amounts to Canadians. For example, several years ago, I bought a camera in the States for $300 that was priced at about $550 in Canada. That's ridiculous. I would prefer to shop in Canada, but I'm not throwing away an extra $250 on a camera because companies know they can get away with gouging Canadians. Okay, let's go around on this one. Deanne, your response.
Thank you for asking me to respond first. We just presented a whole report before the Senate committee looking at price differences. And there are a lot of components that go into determining the final price. One of the things that we've noticed, not as much on food and gas, but on those more expensive items, it's not unusual for vendors that sell in the United States and also sell in Canada, that sell at a higher price in Canada. And in some cases, they're for all the right reasons. It's a smaller We're a smaller country, so we don't have economies of scale. More expensive to do packaging that reflects our local regulations. Mind you, our retailers in Canada have been putting a lot of pressure on some of the vendors so that they can adjust their pricing. But for consumers, it would be a lie for me to sit here with you and to say that eventually the prices will be the same. There will be a difference because of costs associated with doing business here. However, that consumer can be assured that retailers are working hard so that the difference is smaller, not as great as she's mentioned in her email to you.
Ambarish, I think you testified before that Senate hearing that was looking into this issue. Where are you on that person's post to our website?
I think $200 difference on a camera, you should absolutely go down to Michigan and, buy the camera there. Here's the thing. It's true that retail businesses in Canada and Ontario in particular, face a higher cost of doing business. They face higher taxes. They're doing business in a smaller market. Generally, that cost cannot be spread over as big a market as American firms can. But it's not just the higher cost of doing business in Canada or in Ontario. It's also the fact that retailers in general, businesses in Canada, in many cases face less competition. Some of the specific industries that I'm studying are airlines right now. We have a pretty protected airline industry in Canada. As a result, prices here are much higher. And it's not a surprise that Canadians would find it much cheaper to drive to border airports in the US. That's something we're studying right now. If you're a family of four and you can save $200 per person on a ticket, save something like $800 to $1,000 if you want to go down to Florida or to Las Vegas, then you absolutely will and you should. So I'm a little sympathetic to businesses in Canada and Ontario for the higher tax burden they face, higher regulatory burden in many cases, but I'm not completely sympathetic because the lack of competition here allows them to price higher. That's simply what the market allows them to do. And I'm in favor of businesses pricing, however they feel free. I don't believe in this language of gouging. I think firms should set whatever price they want. But I also believe that consumers should be free to, shop wherever they want as a result. And so if businesses want to price higher, Canadians should be free to, pay lower.
Jim Stanford, your view on this?
Well, it's not just that we have specific costs in Canada or that certain taxes are higher in Canada. There's another, I think, bigger issue, and that's the fact Canada is a separate country with a separate currency and a separate economic history. So the average prices that we pay for everything in life, that's what economists call the price level. There's no reason to assume that it should be equal to what the price level is in the United States, because we have decades of history of differential inflation rates and a different system for our economy that's baked into the price level that we pay. The reason that things suddenly look more expensive in Canada is because the exchange rate has gone up. If the exchange rate was actually at the level that economists think makes sense, based on purchasing power levels in the two countries, it would be around 80 cents US, and things in Canada wouldn't seem that expensive. There would still be price differences on some items, but across the gamut, you wouldn't have the same sense that Canadians are being gouged. And in fact, when the dollar was at around 80 cents, a sort of fair value, if you like, we didn't have that whole cross-border shopping phenomenon. Yes, Canadians would go and visit America and they'd shop while they were there, but Americans would come back to Canada and the flow was largely balanced. So I think the exchange rate, far above its fair value, is a big part of the problem here.
Jim, let me ask you a follow-up here, and I'm really not trying to ask one of these smart aleck gotcha questions here, but I am curious. Your union represents people who are in Windsor and in St. Catharines, and those are both cities that are pretty close to the U.S. border. I'm wondering in the course of doing business whether the union might ever, if officials were going to Windsor rather, fly into Detroit or fly out of Detroit because it was cheaper, or go to Niagara Falls, New York, instead of Niagara Falls, Ontario, to get to St. Kitts because it was cheaper. Does that ever happen?
Oh, absolutely not, Steve. Not while you're on union business. I can't speak for what every single CAW member does with their spare time. I'm sure there are some CAW members who do go cross-border shopping, but as an organization, we're firmly committed to spending our money in Canada, and we think as a matter of our culture, it makes sense to promote Canada, but more importantly, as a matter of policy. We talked earlier in the show about the federal government's decision to dramatically increase the exemptions, which actually encourages people to go cross-border shopping. Why on earth would our own government, at a time when they're trying to balance their own budget, encourage Canadians to have that expenditure and that tax money leak out? So there is a role for patriotism, and my organization is very patriotic, but there's also a role for smart policy in terms of setting us up for success to pay for the things we need in Canada.
William, do you agree with Jim that if the dollar were at 80 cents instead of whatever it is, 96 or 97, much of this story goes away?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've done research at the University of Windsor on this whole question of how many people go across the border, and the variable that has the most impact on it is the exchange rate. Interestingly, just to comment on on the viewer's comment saying that she doesn't like to go across the border since September 11, 2001. All the studies that we've done and other people have done have shown a very clear effect that you actually don't get as much cross-border shopping post 9/11. Generally because of the fact that people are uncomfortable with the security regime at the border. It seems like in the last year or so that effect has kind of gone away. For a long time what we were seeing is levels of border crossings that were lower than we would have expected given the strong Canadian dollar. What we see in the last year all of a sudden was we're starting to see these record border crossings, and so I think this post 9/11 effect that was dampening down the cross-border shopping has kind of come to the end of its life, and people are no longer thinking about how the border used to be. They're just thinking about how the border is, and they can deal with it.
Is that your experience too, Deanne? The border is not as tough to get over as it once was?
It's not, and I think it's pretty clear for most consumers is that they're not really going to be stopped at the border coming back. We've heard a lot of consumers tell us that they openly declare that they've spent more than they could spend for the day, and they're just waved through. So,
do you want the border services to be tougher on people who spend beyond the limits over the border? I'm
very concerned with our seemingly, and let me address the guest from Albany who said that the retail sector is not competitive. I would suggest you may want another grant to do a bit more research on retail.
Ooh, that was a shot.
Yes.
I got that. That was a shot.
Retailers come to Canada, and there's a big cemetery of U.S. retailers that have not succeeded in this sector. The retail sector is very competitive in Canada. That's the reason why there's a greater assortment selection. We are concerned. I didn't want you to think that the retail sector in Canada is not patriotic. It is there, though, to serve consumers. It knows it needs to be competitive. But it is concerned with the amount of tax dollars that are left in the United States, because most businesses and retailers specifically understand how important it is to the community, for hospitals, for roads, and for their own businesses. So challenging, but certainly in the last year, to our chagrin, we've seen it much easier. Right? We've seen more consumers decide to cross the border, especially on same-day trips, which is very concerning.
Okay, Ambrish, you took a shot at you. You want your equal time now?
Sure. There's been a couple of studies that show that profits for retailers per square foot in Canada are considerably higher than they are in the U.S. And I think it's completely consistent with the fact that we have a lower level of competition. Now, I'm not talking only about retail. I think it's some of the industries that or some of the markets in which we pay higher prices are protected industries, or industries that have successfully lobbied the government in Canada to keep out foreign competition. So dairy is one example. Airlines in Canada would be another. In Ontario, the alcohol industry, retail alcohol, is actually not subject to the kind of competitive pressures that other provinces in Canada or other states in the U.S. Are subject to. So it's a question of, on the issue of, is it patriotic? Should we be keeping our dollars in Canada? Look, this is an old issue. We have, jurisdictions across North America have always faced the problem of consumers leaking out and going to other jurisdictions that are lower priced and lower tax. That happens in the U.S. It happens within Canada. People living in Cornwall, for example, might consider going to Quebec. People living in eastern British Columbia drive to Alberta to shop. We don't make such a hue and cry about that because we realize that it's impossible to, and nor should we be, policing consumers to make sure that they shop in the state of the province in which they live. And so in this case, it's the question of crossing an international border as opposed to a provincial border, but it's the same issue, right? As long as there's going to be price differences and tax differences, there's going to be some consumers crossing the border to shop. Now, it's not a large enough number of consumers for it to matter, but it's inevitable. I think it's counterproductive to try to shut that flow of consumers down completely.
And I guess we should just clarify, one of the things that Deanne suggested was that you were on some kind of government grant down there in Albany, New York, doing your business. Is that in fact the case?
It's actually not a government grant. No, what I'm studying right now are cross-border airport differences and airline price differences, and how much dramatically cheaper it is to fly out of, say, Niagara Falls, New York, or Plattsburgh, New York, compared with comparable airports in Canada, and how Canadians are driving to these. They're driving 2 to 3 hours each way in some cases to take advantage of price differences. And given those huge price differences, I am completely sympathetic to consumers' concerns and not to Canadian airlines that are that basically don't face enough competition and can keep prices high. So that's actually what I'm starting here right now. It's not a government grant that I'm on.
I think Deanne's not happy with that answer.
Well, I can understand why he's looking at those two, or looking at markets and determining if one is more competitive than the other. What concerns me about those types of studies is that they don't, and Jim mentioned something earlier on, they don't really look at all the layers. You asked an important question to, I think, the lady in Sault Ste. Marie earlier on about minimum wage in the Soo versus counterpart across. And there,
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes.
For those who didn't see that
Yes.
part, $9 and change if you're, I guess, a server.
A server.
In Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Tip server, that's the
Yes.
expression. $2 and change
Yes.
in Sault, Michigan.
Yes.
Huge difference. How do you stay competitive was the question.
I've just, as he was mentioning the airline industry, I just saw a documentary in the United States about the fact that most of the new pilots have to find two more jobs to survive. And so the salaries are so low that they're now even concerned about security. So we need to be careful. I've never suggested, and I don't think the retail sector would suggest, that we should stop people from shopping wherever they want. But if we're going to talk about competitiveness and the economic impact, we need to make sure that the research looks at all aspects of one's industry, and specifically wages.
William Anderson, why don't you pick up on that? Do you think that when people shop, they appreciate the fact that in an attempt to save maybe $100 on groceries by crossing the border and going to Detroit, they maybe, not intentionally, but the effect of that decision is to starve their local hospital of tax revenues that it needs in order to provide those same shoppers with health care when they get sick?
I doubt very much whether they think about that. I mean, I think that cross-border shopping, I can remember the way back in the early 90s when there was this big burst of cross-border shopping. It's not just a sort of a practical thing. It becomes, at certain times, a sort of a fad, I think, and it becomes a sort of activity unto itself. And so, you talk to people around Windsor and they say, well, we're going to go shopping this weekend over in Auburn Hills or something like that. And so it becomes something that people actually enjoy doing. And I don't think that they're thinking about what the economic consequences are at all. But to be fair, I don't think most of us think about what the economic consequences of our actions are when we drive our car and when we, whatever we do that affects other people. We don't usually think about it. We usually think about getting what we want at the right price.
Jim, do we have an obligation to think about that?
Well, I think as individuals, we have an obligation to think about the consequences of our individual acts. But I don't think as a country we should base our hopes and aspirations on individual charity or individual solidarity. That's, again, where I come back to. Government has a role to set a sensible policy framework. It isn't a question of, stopping everyone and frisking them at the border to see exactly what they bought and they're bringing back in. But I think it is a question of indicating that there are rules in place about how much you're supposed to bring back. There are reasons for those rules, and we're not going to turn a complete blind eye to it. If people get the feeling that, I can go and buy anything I want, and in essence, it is a form of tax evasion when you think of it, Steve. These people are not paying GST or PST on their taxes or on their purchases that other Canadians have to. So instead of viewing it as a, big brother state interfering with an individual's choice to go shopping, why don't we view it as a society collectively enforcing our responsibility to pay taxes? I don't go cross-border shopping, and I do pay my taxes. So is it fair to just turn a blind eye and, in fact, as the federal government did this year, encourage people to go cross-border shopping by raising the exemptions? In that regard, it's not a question of blaming an individual. It's a question of blaming our government and our policy framework for doing something that's clearly hurting Canada's retail sector and our budgets.
So, Ambrish, to the extent that this is a problem, all of what we've identified and talked about over the last several minutes, what do you think some of the solutions are to these issues?
Well, I think I'm probably in a minority on your panel right now. Jim Stanford said that he disagreed with government's decision to raise exemptions. I actually testified in front of a Senate panel where I encouraged them to raise exemptions, and I feel they didn't go far enough. And here's why. It actually turns out that New York State and the United States are trying to raise exemptions for American residents to come to Canada, shop here. to as much as $1,000 a day for any average American citizen. Canada's exemption for a Canadian going for a cross-border trip is zero, right? So compare zero with 1,000. And what's striking here is that since 9/11, Canada's government has often complained about the thickening of the border, about the fact that the U.S. government is, really ignoring this open trade relationship we've had and try to clamp down on the border. And I take William Anderson's point, that's gotten better in the last couple of years, but it's still not where we were before 9/11. And here's the first sign from the U.S. government that they might actually want to encourage and allow cross-border shopping and maybe going back to the old ways of the border not being, all that heavily policed by raising exemptions, by making it easy for Americans to come to Canada and shop. And that's why I encourage the Senate panel to reciprocate, to do the same for Canadians, to make it easier for them to cross the border. In an ideal situation, we'd go back to the pre-9/11 days where crossing the border is not that big a deal, where consumers can travel freely, where the border isn't that thick. And the reason to do that is to keep in mind what will happen in the future. Jim Stanford is exactly right. Because the Canadian dollar is so strong today, that's why prices in the U.S. seem low. But there will come a time, no doubt, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when the Canadian dollar is weak again, and when Americans will want to come back to Canada to shop here. And so keeping in mind that time, we want exemptions to be raised. We want to make it easy for consumers to travel across the border, because there will come a time when actually we're going to be dependent on tourism and travel dollars from the Americans rather than what's going on right now. So keeping an eye on the long term, I actually think that the Canadian government did not go far enough. We should liberalize exemptions even further than they are right now, keeping an eye on what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, but I think I want William to come in here and explain to me, as somebody who lives in a border community, how is it in America's interest to raise the daily exemption to $1,000 for Americans to leave their country and spend that money in Canada?
Well, in a practical sense, I mean, I think they see that it's not a problem. It's not too much of a problem because not much of it is happening. And I know that some politicians from the same border communities have been the ones that have been putting pressure on the U.S. federal government to try to encourage Canada to liberalize its personal exemptions. I don't think there's any good economic rationale for it, except for the fact that I think in a lot of ways for border communities, having the border be more open is generally good. It's generally a positive thing. If you live on a border, if you consider it, we live here in Windsor, we're actually a little bit remote inside Ontario, but we have a lot of accessibility across the border. If you can do things that make the border flow more smoothly and make it easier and encourage people to cross the border in both directions, I think that's good for everybody involved. However, I do think that if you've got laws that you're supposed to collect certain types of taxes and duties, you ought to collect them. It seems to me that this is more of a problem with collection than it is a problem with the specific regulations. And I think that there might be technological options out there that make it possible to collect these taxes. They might not collect them actually right at the border, but require people, for example, to maybe sort of enter some sort of information on their smartphone or deposit some sort of a slip as they go across the border and get billed for the duties later on. That would make it possible to actually have these collections without slowing the border up too much.
I know, Diane, the question I'm about to ask probably requires a vast generalization for an answer, but we had the Great Recession starting in 2008. We're now in 2013. A lot of years have gone by, and I just wonder where retailing in general is in Canada today in terms of its having made a comeback from that 2008 Great Recession.
It has made a great comeback, and we've seen recently some big announcements with new global players coming into the Canadian economy and investing hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's an indication of Target being one, but there is a list of new companies, both from Europe and from the U.S., who are now looking at real estate and investing. Canadian consumers were never as hard hit, as we know, as our U.S. neighbors. So from that perspective, retailers have survived a recession fairly well, and we're starting to see more and more investments.
I infer from that you guys can therefore handle more and more competition then.
In fact, I'm a strong belief that more competition is better not only for retailers but also for consumers. So consumers see a greater assortment. Consumers have more choice now in retail in Canada than they ever did before. When new players come to Canada, it forces everyone to reinvest, to look at what they're doing, and that's in fact good for the economy. A lot of staff training. So there's there are a lot of pluses. And I just want to close by saying that I don't think retailers are saying we should put a fence at the border and we should ask everyone to declare everything and make all the trucks wait 3 hours to get through. But what we are saying is that this is an opportunity. I think Jim was also mentioning that. It's an opportunity now for government to look at where can we make some changes to ensure there's a level playing field for businesses in Canada, always understanding there will be ups and downs. But those are, I think, the issues that we should be discussing to make sure we have a competitive environment.
Okay, with just a few minutes left here, Jim, let me put that to you. And in doing so, let me remind you of what the people who responded to our web question said, which was that only 5% saw this as an issue that they thought government ought to get directly involved in. So where does that leave us?
Well, I guess we have an education job to do. I think we have to point out to Canadians why we have a price differential in Canada versus in the United States, help them understand the fundamental economics of it, help them understand how the border helps us if we manage it sensibly, but how the whole process hurts us if we shoot ourselves in the foot, and encourage Canadians to spend their money outside of our system. So I think that the government decided that it was politically popular, perhaps in a few key border ridings, to make it easier to go cross-border shopping, and that's why the government has done this, despite the obvious economic and fiscal leakage that it creates. This is where I hope your show, Steve, fosters a broader discussion and a broader debate where people ask exactly why prices are different in Canada. And there's 50 different reasons for it, including the minimum wage, and how we manage that as a country. I hope this will be part of an ongoing discussion.
Should we cut the harmonized sales tax a couple of more points just to remove some of that price differential?
No, absolutely not. That's joining the race to the bottom, and then we'll have underfunded schools and underfunded hospitals, which are the flip side of the coin of low prices in the U.S. The thing that would really solve the problem would be the dollar going back towards an equilibrium level of something around 80 cents. And we have seen the dollar start to come back down. I'm hopeful over the next year or two we'll see more of that. So some of the pressure might alleviate itself that way.
William Anderson, besides a cheaper buck and apparently not much support probably around this table for lower sales taxes, what can the government do to try and deal with this issue?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to what I was saying the last time. I really see this as a problem of not being able to enforce the law. You know, the CBSA has got sort of three challenges, three things that they have to do. They need to do their security function, which is very important. They need to collect the duties and the taxes, and they need to keep the border moving. And a lot of times they can't do all three. They don't have the resources. And so where it's going to give, and there's been a lot in the media about this recently, is that you actually don't collect those revenues. You actually don't collect those taxes. You wave people through if they've got, you know, less than $60, or if the situation at the border at that moment is critical, you wave people through, and as a result, you don't end up collecting a lot of those taxes. So I think we could go a long way if we could just find a better way to try to collect the taxes and duties that are due on the goods that people are bringing across the border.
Very good. I want to thank all four of you for joining us tonight on TVO for our discussion about our side of the border and theirs. Ambrish Chandra, thanks for being in Albany, New York for us, he of the Rotman School of Management. William Anderson, Chair of the Cross-Border Policy Studies Program at the University of Windsor, he, of course, in our Windsor, Ontario studio. Jim Stanford, the economist from the Canadian Auto Workers, where we have reached him in the Ottawa airport today. And Diane Brisbois, the CEO of the Retail Council of Canada. Good of all of you to join us tonight here on TVO.
Thank you, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.